No, do you know the poverty rate in this country?
I believe it is in the teens.
In the teens, okay. Well, it's about a little over 11%. It just strikes me that most of all your testimony is always about the tax cuts and cutting costs, and it's always about tax cuts, and it's always about the rich. But nothing is ever said about poor, other than you suggesting that you worked yourself.
And if you think that was revealing, just wait, we've got more live footage coming up that takes things even further. But first, let's break down what just happened. When Scott Bessent was posed with a straightforward question about the current poverty rate in America, his hesitation in responding went beyond mere uncertainty. It unveiled a more profound issue, the persistent neglect of poverty and policy discussions that predominantly center on the interests of the wealthy. This moment highlighted a significant disconnect between those in power and the realities faced by millions of Americans living in poverty, as conversations about economic health often prioritize stock market performance and tax cuts for the affluent. The struggles of everyday families tend to be overshadowed, emphasizing the need for a more inclusive dialogue that recognizes the importance of addressing poverty directly.
A woman from Texas, Ms. Garcia, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the Secretary for being with us today. I want to start first by just clarifying your testimony and its delivery. Why did you ask for your witness statement to be embargoed until this morning?
Sorry, pardon me?
Your testimony reads right at the very top, embargoed until delivery, which means that we didn't follow the usual practice of this committee of getting the testimony 24 hours in advance so that committee members can review it and prepare for questions. Yours was posted at 10:01. The committee was at 10. Well, it looks like you need...
My staff is just telling me that it's standard practice.
It's your standard practice? It's not our standard practice as a committee.
I'm told that it was standard practice.
Okay, you were told by whom, sir?
So my comms team and legislative affairs team working with the committee.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think for the record, I think you should clarify to the gentleman that that is not our standard. And I know that at least I didn't know anything about this until I got it here. And I don't think our committee staff on the Democratic side was notified that we would be getting all your testimony late. I just wondered, why you had made that request, and clearly at the top, embargoed until delivery.
Well, embargo to delivery, I think that was mostly meant for the press.
We're not press, sir. We're the members of Congress that have oversight. So, Mr. Chairman, I would hope that you not condone this kind of late submission. It just doesn't help, frankly, for some of the atmosphere that's created when we all just sit down and we still don't have your testimony. Well, then, we just sort of don't feel really good about that. It's not our custom and practice.
Congresswoman, I appreciate the importance that you put on my statement.
Well, thank you. Notice is important, sir. Do you know what the poverty rate is in our country?
I believe that the poverty level is a fixed number.
No, do you know the poverty rate in this country?
I believe it is in the teens.
In the teens, okay. Well, it's about a little over 11%. It just strikes me that most of all your testimony is always about the tax cuts and cutting costs, and it's always about tax cuts, and it's always about the rich. But nothing is ever said about poor, other than you suggesting that you worked yourself
No, ma'am. No tax on tips, no tax on Social Security, no tax on overtime.
Sir, I read your testimony. That's not anywhere in here.
Deductibility.
That is not in here, sir.
Deductibility.
I am referring to your
loans.
testimony and what I've listened to. I said right up front, I can see you and I can hear you. You've not said one thing about what we're doing to help the poor. In fact,
none of your colleagues
even when we
asked
were
me.
talking, even when we were talking about the car seats, that impacts poor people more than anyone else, because not only can they usually not even afford a car seat and have to go to a garage sale to find one, now it's going to be even higher. Your president is suggesting that he wants to give a $5,000 bonus to women to have babies, and then what? Just leave them out on the cold alone? No car seat, no food, no Medicaid, no no chip
Congresswoman,
program?
I can tell you the worst.
And I'm asking you right now, sir.
The
that
worst thing
you-
for
you
working
need- you
families
need to-
will be
as a
the
treasurer-
expiration of the 2017
As Secretary of Treasurer,
Tax
it's not
Cuts and
just
Job
about
Act.
the inflation rate. It's not just about the GDP. It's also about making sure that we keep the poverty rate in this country low. There are people who are living in poverty that never have lived in poverty before. You know, you also failed to say here, you say unemployment remains low. I mean, the study should have read unemployment went up.
Ma'am,
Because it did.
Under the Biden administration,
And the growth
we
administration, we're not talking
experienced
about Biden, sir. We're
record
talking
food bank
about your
usage.
testimony here
Record food
today
bank usage.
about the current president and his plans. Because I can tell you, I'm from Houston. I'm concerned too about some of the tariffs on energy. You know, we have done a lot to increase trade in Houston, construction, everything after the pandemic. And all things were growing. Everything has been growing. But now that the Trump tariffs have surfaced, it is threatening Houston's economy. I represent the area where almost the entire ship channel is in. The petrochemical companies all are in my district. The port is in my district. Everybody is trying to figure out
Gentlewoman's
what the
time has
hell we're going to
expired.
do.
And that moment, it wasn't even the most revealing part. We'll get to that. But first, here's what most people completely overlooked. When the very people entrusted with steering America's economy can't answer the most basic questions about poverty, it's not just a slip, it's a revelation. That was the heart of the clash between Congresswoman Sylvia Garcia of Texas and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent during a recent hearing. The exchange wasn't just about numbers, statistics, or technical jargon. It was about the lived reality of millions of Americans and the yawning gap between Washington's economic conversations and the struggles of everyday families. From the outset, Garcia made it clear she wasn't going to let procedural tricks slide. Her very first question zeroed in on something that may have sounded mundane: the timing of Secretary Bessent's testimony. His prepared remarks were embargoed until the very moment the hearing began. To some observers, this might feel like an inside baseball complaint about paperwork, but Garcia skillfully pointed out the deeper implications. When testimony is delivered late, members of Congress don't get adequate time to prepare their questions. That lack of preparation time doesn't just inconvenience lawmakers, it creates an imbalance. The witness, in this case the Treasury Secretary, effectively controls the flow of information. Instead of a back and forth rooted in careful analysis, hearings risk becoming platforms for polished talking points. By calling out this detail, Garcia wasn't nitpicking. She was making a larger point about transparency and accountability. In government oversight, even the procedural details matter, because they shape whether elected representatives can truly challenge the officials who hold power. But the moment that crystallized the hearing came when Garcia asked a deceptively simple question: "Do you know the poverty rate in this country?" Secretary Bessent hesitated. He fumbled. He guessed in the teens. His answer was vague and imprecise, revealing not just a lack of preparation, but something more troubling. Garcia quickly corrected him. The official poverty rate is just over 11%. At first glance, that may sound modest, even small, especially compared to historical highs. But that percentage translates into more than 37 million Americans living in poverty. That's not a statistic you can brush aside. It's a human reality. Garcia's frustration was palpable. Her question wasn't a gotcha. It was a litmus test. If the Treasury Secretary cannot name the poverty rate, how can the administration credibly claim to craft policies that address the needs of struggling families? The exchange spotlighted a broader issue in Washington. Economic policy discussions are often framed in terms of GDP growth, stock market indices, and investor confidence. Those are valid metrics, but they don't tell the full story. Garcia drove the point home with sharp examples. She reminded Bessent in the committee that for millions of families, even a basic expense like a child's car seat can be crushing. For affluent policymakers, that might sound trivial, but for low-income parents, buying a car seat new can mean the difference between safe travel and risking a child's life. Many parents resort to buying second-hand seats, sometimes without knowing whether they're still safe. That's poverty in practice, not in theory. She also pressed on the distinction between employment numbers and economic security. On paper, unemployment is historically low. But what about the growing number of Americans who are employed and still poor? What about families who have recently fallen below the poverty line because of skyrocketing costs of housing, food, and healthcare? This wasn't just about catching Bessent unprepared. It was about reframing the debate. Economic health cannot be reduced to Wall Street indexes. It has to be measured by whether families can afford rent, groceries, medical bills, and childcare. Time and again, Garcia returned to the same critique. Bessent's testimony, like so many before him, focused on tax cuts, deregulation, and policies designed to spur investment. The beneficiaries of those choices are disproportionately corporations and wealthy individuals. But what about ordinary people? What about the working families who can't make ends meet even with 2 jobs? Garcia asked a pointed question about proposals like a $5,000 baby bonus, a one-time payment meant to help new parents. She asked the obvious follow-up: what happens after the baby is born? A lump sum check might sound helpful, but it does little to address the ongoing structural expenses of child-rearing. Families still have to pay for childcare, health care, housing, and food, expenses that stretch for years. Without ongoing support, a baby bonus is little more than political window dressing. Garcia didn't just keep her focus on abstract numbers. She rooted the conversation in the real economy of her home district, Houston. She described how the petrochemical plants, shipping industry, and port workers who power the city's economy feel the effects of national economic policy directly. When tariffs are imposed, when trade policy shifts, or when global supply chains are disrupted, these workers pay the price. Job losses, reduced hours, and higher consumer prices ripple through her district almost immediately. For Garcia, this isn't theoretical, it's personal. Her constituents don't live in the world of tax shelters and investor dividends. They live in the world of paychecks, bills, and groceries. The power of this hearing lies in how Garcia forced the room to look beyond statistics. A poverty rate of 11% isn't just a number in a spreadsheet. It represents a single mother juggling 2 jobs is still unable to afford quality childcare. A family forced to choose between rent and prescription medication. A child falling behind in school because hunger and unstable housing make it impossible to concentrate. By pushing Bessent on the poverty rate, Garcia wasn't playing games. She was putting a spotlight on the human face of economic policy. Garcia's confrontation underscores a larger truth about how economic policy is often designed and debated. Too often, the voices of ordinary people, especially the poor, are absent from the conversation. Hearings focus on investor confidence, corporate tax breaks, and abstract growth rates. But if those policies don't translate into better lives for struggling families, then what is the point? She reminded the committee that democracy only works when policies reflect the needs of everyday people, not just those with wealth and influence. Her insistence wasn't about partisan points. It was about realignment. Economic policy should be measured by how well it reduces poverty, expands opportunity, and ensures dignity. When economic leaders can't speak directly about poverty, or worse, when they seem unprepared to even acknowledge its scope, it reveals a troubling disconnect. That disconnect isn't harmless. It shapes policy outcomes. If the needs of millions of struggling Americans aren't even part of the conversation, then the resulting policies will inevitably reinforce the status quo, a system that works for the wealthy while leaving everyone else behind. Garcia's exchange with Bessent matters because it cut through the noise. She was demanding that poverty be put at the center of the discussion, not as an afterthought, but as the measuring stick of whether our economy is truly working. This hearing was a reminder of something we all need to keep in mind. Economic policy isn't just about markets or growth statistics. It's about people. If policymakers forget that, if they reduce the economy to charts and investor reports, they miss the point. The real question isn't whether the stock market is booming. It's whether families can afford safe housing, reliable health care, nutritious food, and childcare. It's whether parents can raise children without the constant fear of financial collapse. By pressing Bessent on the poverty rate, Garcia exposed the gap between elite economic discourse and real-world struggles. That gap isn't just uncomfortable, it's dangerous, because when millions of Americans feel unseen and unheard, faith in the system erodes. So the next time someone in power touts economic growth or brags about tax cuts, remember Garcia's question: do you know the poverty rate in this country? If the answer is vague, dismissive, or uninformed, then we should all be asking, how can they possibly make decisions for the people they claim to serve? If this breakdown helped you see the deeper stakes behind what might have seemed like a routine hearing, don't just click away. Share this with someone who thinks economic policy is only about Wall Street. Subscribe if you believe poverty and justice deserve to be part of the national conversation. And drop your thoughts in the comments, because democracy works best when the voices of ordinary people, not just the wealthy, are at the center of the debate.